Hello, Buckeye fans. This is Patrick Murphy from 24/7 Sports and Bucknuts. Just finished up with Ryan Day ahead of Ohio State's first road trip of the year, first Big Ten game of the year. Headed out to Washington this weekend. No Dave Biddle this week. He bailed on me. No, just kidding. He had some other stuff to do, so he did not make it to the press conference, but you will still see Biddle all week on Bucknuts, and he'll have some stuff up later from the press conference. But let's get into it. The biggest sort of newsy piece, I guess, coming out of Ryan Day's press conference is the Buckeyes' travel plans. And instead of flying out on Friday, like they did last year when they made the trip to Oregon, doing just kind of the weekend out there, Buckeyes will instead be headed out to Washington on Thursday. They will fly out, do their normal Thursday evening routine out in Seattle, and then have, as they call it, the best Fridays in football out in Seattle to sort of give themselves time to adjust. And this comes a lot from the plans they had during the College Football Playoff. Obviously, they made a West Coast trip during that time out to the Rose Bowl to face Oregon for the second time. They went to Dallas, they went to Atlanta, and they found what at least Ryan Day and his staff believe was a pretty good routine. The results speak for themselves when you look at what the Buckeyes were able to do, how they played in those games. So they are hoping to recreate some of that this week as they head out to Washington. And some of that is because this is going to be the first major road test in general, but it will be a major test. And Ryan Day made very clear during this press conference that this will be, an absolute battle, as he called it, in quotes, going out to Washington. If you haven't watched much of Washington, I did a story on Bucknuts just yesterday about sort of what to expect from the Huskies. But this is a team that has looked explosive. They have looked dangerous through the first 3 games of the season. Now, the opponents have not been the highest of quality. Their only real test, if you want to call it that, was last week in the Apple Cup against Washington State. And Washington State really hung in that game. If you just look at the score, Washington was able to pull away in the fourth quarter, but that was really a game early in the fourth quarter. So I think that it's tough to kind of get a good read on this Washington team, and we'll go into that more throughout this week. But Ryan Day is really driving home the point that the Buckeyes need to be prepared and need to be ready for what Washington can bring. They've got a quarterback in Damon Williams Jr., who Ryan Day talked about. It's a guy who he brought up last week as someone he saw in high school and didn't even remember it. It was his son RJ that brought it up, that when he was out watching Dylan Raiola, now the quarterback at Nebraska, who was once committed to Ohio State, in a game in Arizona when Dylan was playing out there, Damon Williams on the other side. And he was asked about that. I think he talked about it last week on his radio show. He was asked about it again today, and he said, I wasn't really focused on him, so I don't remember a ton specifics about Damon Williams, but I do remember him being a baller, which was the same word he used a week ago. And I think pretty accurate description of a player that really has been explosive this season. If you've watched any of Washington's games, he's a guy. I'm taking this from the broadcast last week on, I believe it was NBC, maybe CBS, and the comparison to former LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels, now with the Washington Commanders. And look, I'm not saying, and I don't think the point was at the time that this is Jayden Daniels. I don't think he's quite at the level of the Heisman Trophy winner from a couple of years ago. But some of the things that he can do in terms of using his legs, his accuracy with his arm, his ability to throw deep, are similar to what Jayden Daniels did during his 2 years, especially his last year at LSU. And that's something the Buckeyes have to be ready for. Ryan Day was asked about running lanes, and he talked about drilling down on the film of being disciplined, because this is still a relatively inexperienced defensive line. And yes, they got some experience going up against a dual threat quarterback in Parker Navarro. Obviously, the OU quarterback left the game during the first half, did come back for the second half. So they got some of that and have an idea of what it's like to go up against a player like this. But Williams is on a different level, and he's a better thrower, arguably a better runner, a different kind of runner, but something the Buckeyes are really going to have to be wary of. And he's got weapons around him that will be a test. I think you look at Texas, we all thought that would be the biggest test, and it still probably is thus far, but the struggles that Arch Manning has had through not just against Ohio State, but really through the first few weeks of the season. And this may be the most talented, game-ready, whatever word you want to use, quarterback the Buckeyes will have had to prepare for. Now, they do have some more film on him. Obviously, Arch Manning was making his first real start. He started a couple games last year when Quinn Ewers was hurt. But you have more film on Williams and what he can do. So that's going to be tough for the Buckeyes. He has, like I said, been able to be a true dual threat player with his legs, with his arms, and has weapons around him, including the wide receiver Boston, who is big, 6'4". I think the biggest receiver Ohio State will have faced thus far this year, and certainly talented. So defensively, no doubt this is going to be a challenge for the Buckeyes. Offensively, a little bit different challenge. And Ryan Day talked a lot about going out to Husky Stadium, the atmosphere that the Buckeyes are going to face there. And remember, this is the first road game of the season for Ohio State. And there was a lot of talk last year before Ohio State, they had that kind of easy start to the season, and then they go on the road to face Michigan State. And I believe, if I remember correctly, that was the first Big Ten game of the year as well. Well, that was an experienced team, right? A team that had gone on the road, who had, handled tough environments before. This team hasn't done a ton of that. You look across the board at all the guys that will be playing or starting, I guess, maybe contributing in their first real road game. There's a lot of them. And it starts with quarterback Julian Sayin, right, who certainly has been there. He was at all the games last year, right, but not playing in some of those big road environments. So this will be a test for him. I think thus far in 3 home games as the starter, he has passed those tests and looked the part of Ohio State's starting quarterback. But this will be a different challenge, communication and things like that. Where I think the Buckeyes do have some advantage is that a decent number of guys around Julian Sayin have played in tough road environments, right? C.J. Donaldson, running back who played at West Virginia, he's been in some big-time road environments. The offensive line of the guys that are protecting Julian Sayin, trying to open running lanes for the running backs, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Tegra Shabola, all played in the college football playoff run last year, right? Carson Hinsman, Tegra Shabola played at Penn State, for instance. You've got Philip Daniels, who's played in some Big Ten games, started even before this year, at the end of the year last year with Minnesota. So you do have some of that experience. Austin Sierreveld obviously needs to be mentioned as well in that group. The receivers, they've done this. Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. So Julian Sayin will have some guys around him that I think can, if needed, and I don't really expect this to be an issue, but if needed, help calm him down, help get things going, make sure the communication is what it needs to be on the road. But this is going to be something that we won't know how the Buckeyes will react to it until they get out there and the crowd is loud. I've never been to Husky Stadium. I've, in fact, never been to Seattle. I'm excited to get out there this weekend. But everyone I've talked to who's been before, whether it's people on this Ohio State beat who went when the team played out there in 2007, or other people who've covered games out there, been to games out there, the atmosphere is supposed to be nuts. 70-some thousand people. It's supposed to be one of the louder places in the country with a stadium that size. So definitely going to be an obstacle that the Buckeyes, for the first time this year, will have to overcome. But this is something we knew was coming. The Buckeyes knew was coming, right? The preparation for any road game began well before this week or even last week when the Buckeyes were off. So I don't, it's not going to be new in the sense of how they're going to handle it. They're not just installing all that this week. I think that it will be, a good opportunity to show what you can do against a good team in a hostile environment. It was week 1. The Buckeyes really impressed, right? Move up to number 1 in the country. Now you had 2 weeks and then an off week where most people nationally probably weren't thinking about Ohio State too much, right? Against Grambling State, against OU. So now's a chance where there will be eyeballs on this game, and you will be tested with that road environment. And a team that I think people have started to notice a little bit, at least people that are paying attention to the Big Ten or some of the teams on the West Coast. So I think it's a really good opportunity. Defensively, this will be a challenge, as I was talking about before, with some of the weapons. Offensively, dealing with that. And then Washington has some really talented players defensively. They did lose their middle linebacker. It sounds like he's going to be out, but they've got some big corners, one of which who missed last week against Washington State. I haven't seen an update on him, but all of their corners are big guys, I asked Ryan Day about, like, the challenge of that, and he said the wide receivers have to play big. Obviously, Davidson Igbinosun is 6'2", but I think Washington has two guys that are taller than that playing cornerback. So he said you can't allow the ball to come to you. Sometimes you have to kind of go get it because the other guy is bigger or longer. Ohio State's wide receivers aren't small, but not quite 6'4", and against some of the matchup. Now, can you take advantage of that in other ways, maybe with some of the speed things or whatnot, get guys looking the wrong way? Washington has, at least for much of this season, played a lot of man coverage. And we've seen, assuming Julian Sain can be accurate, what that can do against this Ohio State offense. And it doesn't always go well because these receivers are so good. If Julian Sain is on, I think he can really carve up a team that largely plays man. Now, Ryan Day said Ohio State has to prepare for everything from Washington. He said they are capable of playing zone and doing some different things than they've done so far this season, and the Buckeyes kind of expect that. But it's similar to a Notre Dame in the national championship game a couple years ago. What they do best is play man-to-man defense, and what they did for much of that game was play man-to-man defense. And they won some, but Ohio State ultimately won the game, won those battles. So I could see a similar type of matchup there with Ohio State's receivers against this man defense. You have to make the throws. You got to make the catches, as I was talking about, against those receivers. So this is a really interesting matchup for me. I think this will be, because of everything involved, not just Washington, but the travel, the atmosphere, all that. Like, for me, this is almost a bigger test than Texas, and maybe that has to do with the fact that I've watched Texas the last few weeks just not look like the team that was preseason number one. I was wondering if maybe Washington might climb into the rankings this week. Now, obviously, they haven't played any sort of tough schedules thus far, but this is their opportunity. And I think if you are on the Washington side of things, that's the way you're probably looking at this game is like, look, we have a chance against the number one team in the country coming into our house, and we can prove who we really are, who we think we are, all of that. And if you're Ohio State, you've got to go out there and handle business. Obviously last year the trip to Oregon was a good game, but didn't quite go the way you wanted. So can you turn things around and make this a better trip out west than it was a year ago? I think we'll learn a lot about both of these teams coming out of this game. Is this explosive offense for real? Have they just played some bad teams? How good is this defense, which has had some good performances, but has also given up, especially last week, some big yards, some big touchdowns. So, from an Ohio State standpoint, how does a young team handle the road trip and everything that goes into it? Where does this defense really sit? I think it's the best defense in the country, or at least in that conversation. But this will be a test, I think, to try and prove that, and Matt Patricia and whatnot. So the good thing with Matt Patricia, and this is something Ryan Day didn't get asked about, but something I noted is that Jed Fish, the head coach and the play caller at Washington, was on the Los Angeles Rams staff, and the offense looks very similar. I'm a Los Angeles Rams fan. The motion, things like that they do, it's very similar to what the Rams do. Well, Matt Patricia's coached against Sean McVay. He and Sean McVay actually are pretty good friends. He knows McVay well. So there will be nothing new when he turns on the film. Different players doing it, obviously, with a quarterback that's dual threat like that. But the scheme and things like that, it won't be anything shocking to the Buckeyes and their defensive staff and specifically their defensive coordinator. So we're going to wrap up. We'll have more coverage all week on Bucknuts heading into this game. Steve Hellwagon and I will be headed out there this weekend. Really excited for the trip. I think it should be fun. I've talked to a lot of Buckeye fans who are headed out there. It sounds like there will be quite the scarlet in that purple rain, I believe is what they're calling it, the purple out, so to speak, at Husky Stadium. But I think it should be fun. Stay tuned to Bucknuts. Steve is posting the Ryan Day video, so if you haven't listened to his press conference yet, you'll be able to do that over on our YouTube page, and then that'll be up on Bucknuts later, and we'll have plenty more. So stay tuned to it, and thanks, guys.